Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at today's program. My name is Rebecca Treywick. I'm the director of the Wignall Museum, and I'm happy to introduce you to today's Artist Talk with Willie Baronet, presented as part of Collective Care, Uncovering Poverty. Collective Care is a collaborative series of programs developed by the Wignall Museum, the Center for Culture and Social Justice, and the Panther Care Program. Impacts from the global pandemic continue to affect our students and communities at record level rates of food and housing insecurity affect the basic needs of millions of Americans, many of them K-12 and higher education students. Collective Care Uncovering Poverty invites us to connect as we examine these issues together. Be sure to save the date for future programs. We'll be sure to include those links in the chat so you can see those programs. I want to acknowledge Governing Board Member Kathy Brugger, who I am told was going to join us, although I don't see her currently. So we'll give her an early shout out for being here. I also want to give a shout out to our Collective Care planning colleagues, Dr. Letty Romo, Director of Student Equity and Engagement, and Albert Rodriguez, Director of the Panther Care Program, Roman Stolenwerk, Assistant Curator at the Wignall Museum, and Andy Hadel, Wignall Museum Preparator. So good to see you all here today. Before we share some quick housekeeping and introduce you to Willie, I'd like to invite Dr. Romo to share our land acknowledgement.
With respect and honor for the lands where Chaffey College resides and the leaders who came before us, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Gabrieleño Tongva peoples, the original stewards of these sacred and unceded homelands. The Tongva people's history, languages, cultural traditions, and legacy continue to shape this region, and we recognize their continuing presence in their homelands. In the spirit of truth and equity, Chaffey College commits to uplifting the voices of Indigenous peoples, building an inclusive and equitable educational environment, and decolonizing the institution. We also encourage members of the Chaffey College community to learn about the land they reside on and their original caretakers and advocate for culturally responsive action.
So today I'm so pleased to announce our special guest, Willie Baronet. Willie Baronet is a Texas-based artist and educator. Baronet received his undergraduate degree from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and his MFA in Arts and Technology from the University of Texas at Dallas. The Stan Richards Professor in Creative Advertising at SMU Meadows School of the Arts, Baronet has spoken at organizations and schools across the country about creativity and his long-term project, We Are All Homeless, including TEDx, Creative Mornings, How Design Conference, among many others. We Are All Homeless includes the documentary Signs of Humanity, which is available on Amazon Prime, and that premiered at the Dallas Film Festival. The project includes signs from unhoused individuals that Baronet has paid for and collected since 1993. His advertising and design work has been featured in Communication Arts, AIG Graphic Design Annual, New York Arts Director Annual, The One Show, Print Casebooks, Annual Report Trends, the Type Directors Club Annual, and Annual Report Design, a historical retrospective 1510 to 1990, organized by the Cooper Hewitt National Museum of Design. So with that, please join me in giving Willie a warm virtual welcome.
I want to say thank you to Rebecca. We've been talking for what seems like decades, although it's just a few years, about doing something together. And I'm really excited to be here and to share a bit about this long-term art project, We Are All Homeless. It is a deeply personal journey that I'm going to share, and I'm looking forward to questions at the end, but I realize that a lot of this is personal, but it's part of my own creative journey in starting this and then sort of hanging on to the tail of the dragon as it has taken me where it will. So with that, I will share a bit about the background. I have been buying and collecting signs, as Rebecca said, since 1993. She asked me a little bit earlier about how many signs I have, and I think that that number is just over 2,000 now. This sign, which I bought in Dallas quite some time ago, is in some ways emblematic of what I think the plight of the folks on the street are. It's really about me seeing them and allowing them to see me. Signs are sometimes quite serious, sometimes tell a bit of the story of the person that I am meeting. And sometimes the signs are more humorous. Wife and dog kidnapped by ninjas, need money for kung fu lessons. I'd really like that dog back. This is a sign that I bought in Austin, Texas. And what I've come to realize is that even the signs that are humorous or trying to get attention of passersby, there's always a serious human story behind that. Some of the signs that I'll show you today are over 25 years old. Some of the signs I bought as recently as in the last week or two. It is a process that I don't think I'm ever going to stop now that it's become a part of my life. I also sometimes get signs from other people these days. This project's been around long enough that I now will get a package in the mail from somebody who bought a sign and wants to tell me the story of the encounter they had with that person. This particular sign was given to me by one of my students who bought it from a man also in Austin, Texas. This is a sign that I bought from a man named Eddie Dunn in Philadelphia in 2014. Something to ponder. What if God occasionally visits Earth disguised as a homeless guy, panhandling to see how charitable we are? Completely hypothetical, of course. I'm going to talk more about Eddie toward the end of this presentation. His sign stuck with me from the moment I met him, and I really want to share a little bit about the connection that he and I now have. So I've been buying these signs, and Rebecca mentioned I went to grad school it was in 2008 that I started grad school. And it was then that I had these signs, but I started to put them together as a art project. And my professors were very encouraging. And in 2009, I did my first ever show of any sort that used these signs. And in addition, you can see there are signs attached to mirrors. I was also at the time starting to put digital compilations of pieces of signs together and just really exploring what this could be as an art project. And I had tried lots and lots of things. These were some of the ones that I ended up showing. At that same time, while I was in school, one of my classmates was going around and photographing places where people actually were sleeping. This is under an overpass in Dallas, Texas, under one of the busiest highways. And that was my first time to do that sort of exploration. For me, grad school was a chance to really dive deeper into this project and learn more about it. I toured most of the homeless facilities in Dallas, learned a lot about what they were doing. As I continued to do art exhibits, I realized that the power of the signs was evident and that there wasn't much I needed to do. So the more I got into this, the more I stayed out of the way and just found an artful way to put the signs in front of people. What I realized is the signs in real life are often in front of a person. And so people aren't always comfortable making eye contact or engaging with that person. But the signs in exhibits were not, and people were able to lean in. So I just continued to do exhibits. Sometimes they were on the wall, sometimes they were on floors. This was an abandoned house in Dallas. So this was in a gallery, and I was always finding ways to install the signs in a way that seemed to make sense in the space. This was from an exhibit in Michigan just a few years ago, and it was one of two times that I actually spelled the word us as part of the exhibit. Some of my favorite exhibits have been venues that allowed me to suspend the signs in the space where they sit there and slowly spin around, and that people can experience walking among the signs. That's not always possible, but it is one of the favorite things I love about installing these signs. And the process for me is meditative. I've gotten it's physically exhausting sometimes, but depending on the space, this represents 4 installations. One is in New York, one's in Texarkana, one's in Louisiana, and one was in Anchorage, Alaska, which I'll show you a little more about as well. All of these exhibits in the beginning led me to share about this in a few different venues. This is an image from one of the first TEDx talks about this project. And I show this photo of my dad and I because it was the first time I was connecting my own upbringing to the idea of what is home and what is it that home represents. I had a very tumultuous relationship with my father, who was physically abusive. And he and I didn't really start to repair that relationship until I was well into adulthood. But for me, home was connected to safety. And that is something that started back in 2000. And I think this was 2011 at the time I did this talk, and has continued to evolve as I've asked a lot more people about that, what home means to them. What I didn't talk about at that time was my relationship with my mother, which came into play in relation to this project much later. She passed away in 2003 and never really got to see this project become the project it's become. She knew I was collecting signs, but I'd do lots of strange things. And I think she just kind of always looked at me and shook her head and was like, what's wrong with him? But I'll talk more about that. It sort of ties into my discussion about Eddie Dunn, which I'll talk about toward the end as well. But it was during that first TEDx talk that I first broached the idea of traveling across the United States, buying signs along the way. And what I didn't realize was that that was going to culminate in the creation of a feature-length documentary. But it was a long process of planning, and the actual experience itself is certainly going to go down as one of the great experiences of my life. It was 31 days of buying signs in 22 different cities. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that experience by starting with some of the signs that we bought along the way. One of the first signs was this one, Sugar Mama Needed, which was in Seattle, our very first stop. This was from a young woman in San Francisco. This was one of the signs we bought in Philadelphia. It was right outside of Philadelphia, and I bought it from a man who was living in a tent with his wife. This was from a man in Chicago who is living under Clinton Bridge. I think you will probably see a clip of him later on. One of my favorite signs from Los Angeles came from this man who was, I would have guessed, in his mid-70s, and clearly had a sense of humor. And again, even the funny signs have a not so funny backstory. He was not willing to be interviewed for our documentary, but we did chat for a few minutes. One of my favorite signs from the trip across the country was this simple sign. It simply says, "Spare change." Part of what stands out to me is that the actual lettering is done with a ballpoint pen, and I can almost feel the angst and pain in that lettering. I'm going to show you a photo of the man I bought this from, whose name was Michael, and he was in Las Vegas. And I'll show you his image in a little while. And for me, it's the disparity between him and this sign that really stood out. Some of the people we met across, traveling across the country. In Portland, I met this man named Owen, who had very, very creative signs. He told me he arrived in Portland with over 60 different colored Sharpies, which he'd given away to a lot of his friends on the street. And he was taking care of this man whose name is Polly. Polly, like many of the people on the streets, I've come to learn it's over a third of the people on the streets suffer from various types of mental illness. I think in some communities that percentage is much higher. Polly would just start screaming randomly. And Owen told me that no matter what he was given, whether it was money, pizza, cigarettes, whatever, he would share it with Polly. And I often wonder what the plight would be of some of the folks on the streets if it wasn't for the people looking out for them. This was a man I met in San Francisco. His name was Neil. His homeless sign was written on an envelope from the VA. He was a veteran. His wife had recently passed away. When I asked if I could take a photo of him, he wanted me to show him holding this booklet he had of music. Apparently he was writing, I think it was an opera, and I don't know anything about music, so I couldn't evaluate it, but he and I walked together probably for 20 minutes or so. He was toting an oxygen tank with him. And yeah, I'll never forget that cool San Francisco evening walking with him. This was a young man I met in Denver whose name was Chaz Kyle. He was hanging out with a friend of his who you will see later in a clip as well. And they did not want much of the interview to be on camera because they were telling us about life hopping trains, which was another subculture that I've come to learn a little bit about. Danelle in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I think was the oldest person I bought a sign from. At the time, she was 78 years old. She was living in a park with her son and 2 cats. And the main reason she said she was living outdoors was that there was no shelters in Albuquerque that allowed for pets. And in the documentary, she talks about wanting to start her own organization called Pets with People that would allow people with pets to have a place to stay who are on the streets. I met Michael in Omaha. Probably one of the people who had the biggest emotional impact on me. Part of it was he had one leg. He was a Vietnam veteran. He told me a little bit about that experience. He also was on the street with a group of people who were sharing resources with each other. And while we were filming, he had to adjust his prosthetic leg. And there was something about just the connection I had with him that really stirred me up.
My wife passed away of breast cancer. I had no insurance, couldn't keep the mortgage up, and it was just a matter of time. You know, you wake up one morning and you got the sheriff putting a tape on your door saying you have to leave today. I'm just so thankful my children are grown, because you know what would I do out here if I had my 3 boys and they were still 8, 9, and 10 years old? What would I do? Yeah, I feel like there's no end. I mean, I know there is. Some days you feel hopeless, some days you don't. My philosophy on life is if you wake up, that should be the hardest part of your day, when you wake up. The rest of the day should be easy because the good Lord's given you another day to do whatever. But yeah, there's days you feel hopeless and trapped, but then there's days you feel hope and you think that maybe you're going to turn the corner. So.
I like to show that clip of Robert because in a lot of ways he represented a pretty typical encounter with older men that I met on the street. This is Cheryl. I met Cheryl in Detroit, and when I drove up to her, she was sitting on a milk crate holding her sign. She when I asked if I could buy her sign, like a lot of people, she was a little skeptical at first, like, why you want my sign? And I told her it was for an art project. She asked how much. I said, how much would you sell it for? She kind of eyed me up and down and said, $15. And when I said, sure, and I handed her the $15, she reached into the car and hugged my neck. And to this day, is first and only person who has ever done that. Was grateful we got to interview her for the documentary. She was very authentic, and she talked about the hustle of being on the street. This is the man, Michael, whose sign I was mentioning earlier from Las Vegas. Michael struck me as somebody who could be a movie star. He just had a beautiful presence about him. He was very soft-spoken, very, very dirty, clearly hadn't been able to clean himself in a long time, but very thoughtful, and was really grateful that he was willing to talk to us on camera for this. The youngest person that we met on this trip with the sign was Ellie, who is in the front here. She's Romanian. She was a refugee with her family. They were trying to get asylum so that she could stay here and go to school. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and she since has had to go back to Romania. Now has 2 children. I am in touch with her every so often through Facebook mostly. And she, the last time I heard from her, she was back in the United States in Florida and is still trying to find a way to get an education. At this time, she was in Baltimore, and we spent quite a bit of time talking to her, and the woman to her left was sort of looking out for her on the streets. But Ellie she spoke 5 languages, just blew me away at how intelligent and how full of promise that she was. The last person that I'll show you from this trip was Nigel. We met him on the very last day of our trip in New York City. He had been displaced to New York from Louisiana because of Hurricane Katrina. He wants to be a journalist, and just a really sweet young man. He's another person who I've stayed a little bit in touch with, in a spotty way. I will get an email from him every so often. He was in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, and the last time I heard from him, he was back in New York. I've tried to arrange to meet him in New York, but that hadn't happened again since I bought his sign in 2014. The part of the project that I want to talk about the most was the part that has surprised me, and that's the ripples, the impact, the effect that it has had, not just on me, but on people that I've encountered. And that's showed up in lots of different ways, large and small. And part of the reason I share this is often with students and with other folks. I am often trying to get people to realize that no matter how strange your idea might be, whatever creative impulse you have, I want to nurture that in people, because I think it might surprise a lot of folks as to the kind of impact they might have. One of those ways has clearly been doing exhibits, which I've done all over the country in the UK. And I think I'm in the process of putting a presentation just of all the exhibits together. I think it's in between 60 and 70 so far. These are a few of the ones that I am sharing right now. In the lower left, you see the Anchorage Museum. That was the most recent one right before COVID, and I'll show some images of that later on. This is stop motion from the single exhibit that had the most viewers. Over 300,000 people went through this exhibit in Michigan a couple of years back. And as you can see, it's an awkward place to do an exhibit. There were all sorts of things in the hallway of this convention center, but it's the biggest in terms of audience. The other aspect of impact has come through media. A lot of this really took off while we were traveling across the country. We started to get contacted in almost every city that we arrived in. People wanted to follow us around or write about the project as we were buying signs. Sometimes it was a TV station or radio station or a newspaper. And about halfway through the trip, I believe we were in Minneapolis, one of the stories that was written got picked up by the Associated Press, and that just exponentially drove attention all over the country. I think at that point, that story was featured in 4,000 different outlets across the country. We were on the front page of Reddit for a period of time, which I didn't know what that meant, but my students were blowing up my phone to tell me that that was a big deal. So, and as we continued, one of the things that happened was I did an interview on All Things Considered for NPR, and a woman based in Philadelphia happened to hear that interview. She contacted me. Turns out she is the head of public health at UPenn at the time. And so we collaborated. She asked if I would send her a PDF of the sign. She wanted to do a research project anecdotally analyzing the content of the signs, which she did. And then that was subsequently published in the American Journal of Public Health. She and I became good friends. We did a number of projects together. The next research thing that was published was just this past year. I went to meet with her and her grad students. Now she's the head of public health at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And we did a week-long project with her grad students buying signs. And then I would introduce the person that I bought the sign from to the grad students. And if they gave permission, they did an interview with them, and they were putting research together about specifically the problem of homelessness in Philadelphia. They have published an article under the title, Even a Smile Helps, which was based on this sign that you see right here. And the article has been published in the International Journal of Social Psychiatry. I'm currently working with Dr. Rosie Frasso and her colleagues about another project that's going to hopefully happen in the spring of 2022. 2022. And we are going to try to do another project that is going to research and track how empathy changes in students when they are working on projects like this. I am not a researcher, although I've now gotten co-author credit on these research projects. And I've grown to really appreciate how research can impact things and how art and science can come together to make a difference. Rosie and I spoke at a public health conference during COVID in San Antonio. It was March of 2020, so it was early days of COVID, but I never thought I would be speaking to a bunch of future doctors and people in that space about this work. But I realize now that it's got lots of, there are ripples that I can't predict. One of the other ripples that I wasn't able to predict has been the way the media attention has generated a number of viral videos. One of the things that was uploaded by Upworthy has over 6.4 million views. It's a short 2.5-minute video. That was noticed by the company Brut, which is based in France. They published it in both English and French, and on Instagram and Facebook. This particular one that is subtitled in French had over 1.4 million views. And then I was contacted by a Russian media company called TOK, which publishes a lot of, I think, public interest, feel-good type stories. I still don't know what any of these subtitles mean, but they've also published their own edited version of this story on Instagram, and it's also gone viral. Our film, as Rebecca mentioned, it was released. It premiered in Dallas. We went through this film festival experience. All of this was new for me as part of my own creative process, even though I had a background in advertising and had made commercials and things like that before. I'd never been part of editing a feature-length film. and certainly didn't really know anything about the film festival experience. But again, it was another chance for me to meet people in different locations. But I think my favorite kind of ripple is doing what I'm doing now on Zoom, but it is speaking to groups and getting to let them hold a sign for the first time, ask questions, talk about their own experiences. And I've been blessed to get to speak to groups of students of all ages, policemen, a Buddhist young adult conference that happened to be held in Dallas, Texas, just professional groups, just all sorts of groups. And I try, if I can work it into my schedule, I say yes to everybody. Sometimes the ripples are small. I was doing an artist talk at a big fancy building in downtown Dallas, and this man showed up wearing a U.S. Marine Corps baseball cap. He was not your typical art talk person. And at the end of the talk, he started to ask a question and then just broke down in tears. And we had a lot of trouble understanding him. Later that night, he sent me this message on Facebook. I'm the Vietnam Marine that spoke to you tonight at your talk. I'm not sure if I could be heard when I spoke. Seeing your collage of signs was a startling experience for me. I just stared at it and cried for 30 minutes. It gave me a place to attach some of my angst, and it helped me heal a little. I find you to be personally just as moving. Thank you, sir, for helping make the voices in the wilderness a bit easier for the world to hear. I've also learned that about 11% of the people on the street are veterans. The fastest growing segment of homeless on the streets in the United States happens to be female veterans. So I've unwittingly become a student of this cause and continue to learn a lot about that. Some other ripples, this is an exhibit that was in Indiana, and I was sent photos when classes were there looking at the exhibit. My good friend Lisa in the red sweatshirt here mentors a bunch of young women here in Dallas, Texas, and every year I speak to them, and sometimes we'll watch the documentary, but it's a small group, but very touching for me to be able to see these young girls of very different backgrounds connect to this. One of the largest groups of students that I brought signs with for was this high school in South Texas. And I think I had over 400 signs in my Prius at the time in the middle of a hot Texas summer. One of the things that I've also come to realize is the smell that is baked into a lot of these signs, which has to do with human sweat and cigarette smoke and pizza juice from a pizza box, that it fills my car, and my car permanently has a certain smell to it because I am often carrying signs around. But it's one of the reminders of the humanity of the people behind the signs, and I'm grateful for it. It reminds me of that. I also, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the young blonde woman right above the L in the word lay. She was a junior in high school at the time. Afterwards, she and I took a selfie together. And 2 semesters ago, she was in my class at SMU and reminded me that she had been there and sent that selfie to me. And just, again, another strange ripple that I really appreciate. I was mentioned in a tweet from a high school in the UK, which was saying their students were studying issues associated with homelessness, and they cited Henry Moore, Leonardo da Vinci, and me as inspiration, which a lot of my art friends, of course, gave me grief for. But it was amazing because I went to their website, got to see some of their student projects that were in some cases drawing hands and feet of the unhoused, in some cases doing things with cardboard to make sculptures. And I had no idea where this school was or anything, and yet another reminder that there's so many unintended ripples that I think are important. One of the things that I brought to the college where I teach is we are about to do our third annual March Across Campus, which usually is an event where we make blessing bags that we give to people to put in their cars to hand out on the streets. We have a series of speakers, typically some from local organizations that deal with the homeless. And then we march silently in single file across campus just as an awareness raising event. And this was from the first year that we did it. And, we are in I teach at an incredibly lucrative, most of our students are fairly privileged, not all of them. And typically I have at least one speaker who was a student at SMU who has experienced homelessness. And I've already had a couple of students volunteer to speak at this upcoming March, which is going to be November the 20th. And then last year we did this in COVID, which was of course a bit of a challenge, but I'm going to show you a short video that one of my other students shot and edited of our second March. And I'm very much looking forward to the upcoming March. I think there are a lot of students who weren't able to participate during COVID, and we've already gotten interest from a lot more student groups, sororities, the Human Rights Organization, and other there are organizations like Mustang Heroes. So I'm looking forward to having a lot more students join us for this march, as well as people in the community. This is an image that I'm sharing, which another unexpected ripple for me was that a group in Boston, or just outside of Boston, a high school theater group was putting on a production of Rent. And they asked if I would do an installation at an art studio that was a gallery that was adjacent to the theater where they were doing the production. I said, sure. And before it was over with, the students had asked if they could use some of the signs on the set. And this is actually on the night of the production that I got to attend. And you can see that signs were used in the set of their production of Rent. I was really moved by their level of skill and their singing ability. And they also allowed me to go to one of their rehearsals. And I'm going to show you a short clip that I shot on my iPhone at the rehearsal, which if you listen closely, you can hear me sniffling toward the end of it because they moved me to tears.
525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments so dear, 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter, in strife, in 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year in the life? How about love? How about love? How about love? Measuring love.
It still gets to me a little bit. One of the organizations that we partnered with before in Dallas is Vogel Alcove, which specializes in helping single mothers for the most part, lots of homeless mothers and children. And it's an amazing organization. They provide schooling, they've got daycare, they hand out supplies of all sorts. They do their own fundraisers and have brought in big name musical performers for their fundraisers. But one of the things they do every year on January 1st is called Day One Dallas. And they've asked me to participate the last few years. And one of the things that I've developed in this process has been, especially for smaller children or adults, is putting a bunch of art supplies out and asking the children to answer the question, what is home? I've done this at several exhibits as well, and I've collected thousands of answers to that question. But it's also a chance to encourage the kids to be creative. And of course, what's better than art by kids? There are usually between 5,000 and 10,000 people attend this big event. So there are all sorts of activities for kids and families. You may notice there is a Star Wars character holding a sign of the Death Star, which I guess is technically his home. But there were a bunch of people in costumes there to entertain the kids. He wandered up, and it's honestly the first and only time that'll probably ever happen, to ask if he could do one of these what is home things. And I have a short video clip of him actually making his creation. But workshops for kids, for me, is another way of having some impact. And I'm also, one of the many things on my to-do list is to develop curricula to take this into a place where teachers could teach these kinds of things, to bring this kind of awareness into the classroom. I mentioned earlier the most recent big exhibit that happened right before COVID was at the Anchorage Museum. Literally February was when the exhibit opened. I was able to go and spend a week there and go on opening night. I also bought about 6 signs while I was in Alaska. So you can imagine there are people on the streets of Anchorage, Alaska in February. I was walking through snow and ice, and I just couldn't fathom what it must be like for them. I'm going to show you just a short clip to show you, this was right before everything got shut down. So there were people there, but this is about 500 signs for just for reference. That exhibit was also done in conjunction with the man who wrote the book Evicted, which was a bestseller a few years back. And they've developed an exhibit related to the data that's in that book about evictions, which is really powerful. I strongly recommend it. And again, to go from a larger thing to a smaller ripple, I was contacted this past summer by a young woman who's a junior in high school here in Dallas. and she was looking through colleges, came across this project when she was looking at SMU, and asked if I would do a Zoom call with her, asked if I would mentor her over the summer. She came and helped pack boxes for an exhibit that we did not too long ago. And then she sent me this piece of art that she made, which she said represented the impact the exhibit had on her, that the signs changed from cardboard to bright colors as she realized that there were unique stories behind each one of the signs. She is continuing to volunteer. She's actually come to events on SMU's campus. And to me, just again, excites me when I see the enthusiasm and passion and leadership that a lot of students demonstrate. And to that end, I now am a faculty in residence here at SMU, and I live at one of the dorms called Armstrong Commons. We've done a number of events here at the dorm. One of them was making blessing bags. I think we've done this 3 or 4 times now, but I'm always impressed by the students, their willingness to be involved, to help promote the activities. Many of them are also going to be helping us with the march that's coming up. And just this Saturday, to really bring this to the present time, this past Saturday, this is the first time I did an exhibit in the hallway of this dorm. And I had a student volunteer to help, and we put it up in about 5 hours and put up a piece of blank cardboard on the opposite wall with Sharpies attached. And I'm enjoying watching students answer the question, what is home, and continuing to add to that bit of data. So I promised that I was going to tell you more about Eddie, the man who made this sign, Something to Ponder. What if God occasionally visits Earth disguised as a homeless guy, panhandling to see how charitable we are? This is me asking Eddie about this sign when I met him in 2014. So tell me a little bit about what was behind your sign.
I had a more generic sign prior to that, and I wanted to go in a different direction, like be a little innovative. So, I mean, you know.
But how'd you get the idea? I mean, where'd that come to you around?
It actually came to me, like, believe it or not, out of anger initially, because someone had said something derogatory towards me when I had asked them for money, and I came up with it in my head. I didn't think of it. I mean, I didn't say it to them, but I said, like, you know, for all you know, I'm God. Like, it's just, you know, checking to see if you know, how charitable people are, and if that's the case, you people are screwed, you know?
So I knew I liked Eddie right from the beginning. He was clever, he was intelligent. You can see that he was a bit scuffed up. What I didn't know about Eddie at the time was that he was a heroin addict, and that some of those scabs on his face were literally from overdosing and falling onto the concrete out of the backseat of a car, and then being revived by the police. I think he said 2 or 3 times he was revived after overdosing. And 2 years later, I was talking about this project, and you can see this photo was posted on Facebook. You can see that behind me is a big image of Eddie's sign. He came across this and sent me a message out of the blue 2 years later that said, hey, you know, I'm Eddie. You probably don't remember me, but I'm the guy who made this sign. And I replied, of course, I remember you because you're in the documentary. I see you all the time. And that's when he told me about the fact that he was an addict at that time, that he was now sober for coming up on 2 years, that he was employed, he was in much better physical condition, had reconnected with his son and daughter, and was a brand new grandfather. I told him that I was about to go back to Philadelphia. I was doing an exhibit that was part of a big, huge group show at the Democratic National Convention, and asked him if I could pick him up and take him to lunch. This was the exhibit, which was a very small exhibit, but it was a humongous show with, I think, about 100 artists total. And you can see that Eddie's sign is on this exhibit. I picked Eddie up. He looked much better. He had put on probably 30 pounds. And he stood in front of this exhibit, and of course, was the first time he'd seen that sign that he made with his own hands 2 years prior. And he started crying. We spent, I think it was 4 hours. We ate a burrito, we talked, I got to know him, really just loved his energy. And since then, he has been willing to volunteer to speak on panels. Anytime I contact him for help, he wants to help because he's now sponsoring lots of other addicts. And here are just a few images of his first grandkid. He now has 2, but he's probably one of the most doting grandfathers I've ever met. I was doing an exhibit a few months after that in Philadelphia at UPenn, based on that research project I mentioned a little while ago. Dr. Frasso is the one in the gray hair next to me. And we had all of her students, and Eddie joined us on the panel to talk about what it's like to be behind the sign. We continued to do things together, and a little while after that, I invited Eddie to join me on stage at another TEDx talk about this project, which was titled "It's Just Us." And it was a chance for me to let Eddie talk about life behind the sign. As much as I talk about this project, it's difficult for me to bring the kind of awareness that Eddie's able to bring. We've continued to do things. And then not that long ago, again, this was right before COVID, I was contacted to do another exhibit in Philadelphia by this priest, Father Jim, who I am now really a big fan of. He asked me to do this during Lent at his church outside of Philadelphia. It's actually in Flowertown. And he is one of the churches that has one of those homeless Jesus statues right outside the front door. So we did the exhibit. At the end of the exhibit, I went back down there to take all the signs down, pack them up, and ship them back. This was a group of people who were there making blessing bags that last day. And Eddie, of course, joined us for the panel discussion again. And at the very end of this, Father Jim asked me to go outside, and he wanted to tell me about these 3 acres that they had on the other side of their graveyard. It was a pretty big complex they had at this church. And apparently they had been trying to figure out what to do with these undeveloped acres. And up until I was there, they were planning to do a wedding venue. But here's what he told me.
Because of the We Are All Homeless exhibit and everything that has happened since you've been with us, we decided that we're going to turn our remaining 3 acres into a transitional housing venue with individual homes, 8 to 10 of them, with a central community center where people can come after they leave a shelter and live there for 2 full years and gain all of the support services necessary for them to be sustained into the future. And we're really excited about it.
So when he and I first started to connect, I told him that I had grown up the son of a mom who was a hardcore Catholic, and that she had passed away, but that I thought if, she was somewhere looking down on all of this, she probably was smiling, thinking that I was talking to a priest, because I hadn't been a Catholic for many decades, and I think that always bummed her out. He told me about his connection to his mom, that his mom was the reason he became a priest. And so after he told me about what they were going to do with the property, he then shared this with me.
Thing, we've decided that we're going to name this transitional village that's going to support people out of homelessness in honor and memory of your mom. And so your mom's name is going to bear on this village.
I was not expecting that. It's going to be called Dorothy's Village. They're still in the planning phase. COVID slowed things up a little bit, but he's keeping me updated on the progress. But I mentioned this was a deeply personal journey for me. And from a selfish perspective, I think this single thing had the biggest impact on me. And I just didn't expect it. I mentioned the question, what is home, which I've now asked of lots of people and gotten answers at lots of exhibits. One of the final pieces of the documentary shows a compilation of some of the answers that we gathered as we were nearing, or as we were traveling across the country. But I began to ask this question of almost everyone that I met. So the last clip that I'm going to show you is this one.
Is a place when I get done with work, I have a place to go sit down, relax, have my own quiet time, whatever, be able to fix my own food, I can pay my own bills. That's home to me.
Home is like if you wrapped yourself in a nice warm comforter when it was cold outside. That's home.
I feel safe, where I feel comfortable. It could be anywhere. It doesn't really matter.
And what does home mean to you?
Home means heaven.
Having a place over my head, over my head.
A place that's dry and warm. Whatever you make it.
The one word that I would use for home is probably safety.
Home for me would be someplace I go to every day, sleep, take a shower, that I wouldn't have to worry about finding a place to sleep every night.
Home is wherever I'm with the ones I love and the ones love me. It really doesn't care like where that is.
It's safety. Number one, it's comfort, and it's kind of like what you know.
Wherever I lay down at night, that would be home to me.
It doesn't have to be a physical place. It can be the people you're with or the experience you're having, but describing it's pretty hard.
Home means security to me, because a large portion of the world, of the United States, will never know what it's like to not have a roof over your head. And I think a lot of people take advantage of that. To not know where you're gonna lay down is like the most frightening thing in the world.
What does home mean to you?
Sanctuary, place of rest.
See, now, I haven't had a home since my wife died. See, when me and her were together, she made it a home. Love and family, that's what a home is to me.
Yeah. But home to me was where Mom was there, eating dinner, But as of right now, home is Clinton Bridge. That's where I sleep, underneath Clinton Bridge.
To me, a home is I can put a key in a door, open and go inside and relax, take a shower, watch TV, you sleep in a bed. That's home to me.
Home to me would be one day somewhere I can call my own. That's what home would mean to me. Right now, home is wherever I can sleep.
Home to me is like pretty much where my friends are at, where my family's at. Because we don't have a sense of home, so home is our family. Wherever we are together. When I lay my head next to him at night, that's home to me.
Home for me is that feeling of, I don't know how to say this in English, but it's literally like feeling physically and spiritually. It's feeling love, happiness, and calmness all at the same time. Like they cannot live without each other.
28 years ago, when I started buying signs, I really did used to think it was us and them. And today, what I know is that it's just us. Thank you for having me. And if anyone has questions, I look forward to trying my best to answer them.
Thank you, Willie. Thanks for sharing about your inspiring project. 28 years, that in and of itself is pretty incredible. Clearly this has become, it seems like it's become your life's work, right? So
Yes, at least part of it, for sure.
Yeah, right. Not that it's the only thing you have going on, but it's interesting to see you talk about the intersections and ripples and all these surprising things that have come about from this project. I think that's really beautiful. I wanted to ask you to start off, like, obviously there have been so many positive impacts, the ripples that you shared with us about this project, but how do you care for yourself in this work? Because this is really heavy, like heart and soul stuff. So how do you do that?
That is a good question. And I would say I haven't always been great at managing that. I noticed that Tim Chumley is on this call, the co-director of the film. And Tim, I welcome any comments if you want to add to something I'm saying. I think that, like, for us, when we were traveling across the country, I'm of course quite used to buying signs on a regular basis, but the other filmmakers were not. And we would debrief every night and process our feelings a little bit, let go of some of the things we might be hanging on to. As a long-term caretaker, I would also say that this is a challenge for me to let go of wanting to save everybody and take care of everybody, and that I have to keep remembering that I've got this bigger purpose of spreading awareness, and it's not easy.
Yeah, the nightly check-ins were pretty important because it was a very heavy, certain days were heavier than others, but many days were incredibly emotionally draining and taxing. And at the same time, it was very rewarding. There were a few days that, as I recall, were more challenging than others. Talk about when you met Michael, Willie.
Yeah, so I showed them a picture of Michael, and he was the man with one leg, the Vietnam vet. Literally after that interview, which was on in a little random piece of grass in Omaha, Nebraska, we went over to the parking lot of a Burger King, and Tim and one of the other filmmakers were interviewing me about interviewing Michael. And I completely broke down unexpectedly talking about him. And I think it may have been because he was about my same age. I'd also lost another personal friend recently who was missing a leg. I don't know what triggered me so much about him, but as much as I do this, I still have to remember that this takes a toll, and I do tend to collect these stories and carry them around, and it's tough to process that.
I'm going to field a question out of the chat from Kim earlier on in the presentation. They ask, is it common to find people who are on the autism spectrum disorder who begin self-medicating themselves for anxiety? I have done some work with ASD addicts.
So I'm not a mental health expert, obviously. As I mentioned, I've heard figures from a third to as high as 60% in some communities of the people on the street have some form of mental illness. I love this question because it brings to light this idea of addiction, drugs and alcohol, and self-medication. It has been, I think, a lot of people who aren't familiar with the situation people are in on the street tend to immediately dismiss addicts as people that don't deserve any help or care. And the truth is that a lot of them don't have health care. They have no way to get prescriptions. They are medicating, and drugs and alcohol are their best option. And we all know that's not great. Nobody wants that to be the case. But thanks for that question, because I don't know specifically about the autism situation, but I do know that there is a high percentage of people that are on the street.
We have a question from Massimo. Can you expand on where the title came from? We are all homeless. How did you conceive of that?
So I was in a class in 2008, and I remember the class. It was a class on what's the word? Art that disrupts. We were about, the class was about, I'm blanking on the word for the kind of movement, but it was about coming up with art projects to disrupt everybody's daily life. And I was clearly in this throes of trying to figure out doing something with homeless signs. And it occurred to me in class that I was going to call this project We Are All Homeless. I don't know why necessarily. I think my underlying idea was that we're all human beings. We all need to ask for help. We've all struggled. We've all messed up in various ways. And at that time, of course, it was a few years back. And so I immediately went online to see if the URL was available, bought it. And from that point forward, I've called this We Are All Homeless. A lot of times when people ask me about that name, I will ask them, what does it mean to them? And so, Massimo, I don't know if you're willing to share, but I'd be interested in hearing what that title said to you when you first heard it.
Oh, so Massimo in the chat says, I thought you were giving them a voice and they were saying that.
I think that's a great interpretation as well. It's not everybody, when I buy a sign, do they want to know why I'm buying the sign, but a fair number do. And so I tell them this is a long-term art project about raising awareness. And I am blown away by how quickly they go, hell yeah, somebody needs to tell our story. And it's like they get it much quicker than a lot of my friends do. And I often hand out stickers that say We Are All Homeless to them, and they seem to get that title pretty quickly as well. So for whatever that's worth.
Willie, I know you often say, your initial and sort of primary goal is to raise awareness about the issue of unhoused and people who experience homelessness. What it's grown into is a empathy building exercise, right? And so, clearly people are having that experience as they see your signs, whether, it personally affected them or not. So I think that's a really beautiful thing. Professor Deanna Hernandez is asking, why study empathy in students, and what have you noticed about people and empathy through your work?
Well, I could probably turn it over to Tim, and he would have us in tears talking about a few of his early experiences buying signs. Tim's a longtime friend of mine, and I just got to watch him dive deep into this during this process. So I may turn it back over to you in a second, Tim. But I'd also like to share that when I went to Philadelphia and did this research project with the Jefferson students for a week. So these are all grad students who are likely going to be in the public health space or become doctors. None of them had really any significant encounters with folks on the streets. After a week of doing this, they were amazingly comfortable talking to the folks they were interviewing. And some of them, I think 3 in particular, said they, as a result of this week project, they were changing the focus of their medical practice pursuit. And 2 of them were going to go into the public health space directly working with the unhoused. So my experience, and I also encounter this even with students here at SMU, is that awareness is what leads to the empathy shift, into the compassion shift. And I'm so used to it that I forget it, but I am reminded often that there is just a lot of power in the signs and the stories that people project when they see the signs. Tim, I know you've got probably things to add. Any thoughts?
I think it's important because the sign, there's a financial aspect to the sign. I think it's important to disassociate those two pieces, because I think a lot of people may think, well, it's incumbent upon me to give this person money when I see them on the street. And one of the things that I've learned through this is that it's really not about that. It's more about connection. As Willie has said a number of times, if you don't do anything other than acknowledge that person, if you stop and you say, hey, what's your name? How are you doing? My name is Tim. That alone is an example, a demonstration of empathy that, in my judgment, a lot of these people are missing in their everyday lives. Because as some of the signs have said, a lot of these people feel completely invisible. And to be acknowledged and to be connected with, just that alone can be very profound.
Many of us on this call are working in higher education. We're working in California at community colleges. And of course, we see rising rates of students who are impacted through the housing crisis and eviction, food insecurity, and a lack of basic needs. And so, of course, these issues are often compounded by the fact they're caring for their families, trying to find work or have multiple jobs, and they're trying to get an education and, do better, right? And so for viewers who work in higher education or who just want to help and be a part of the change, you talk about small things. So are there other small things that we can do to be part of positive change around issues of homelessness?
Well, I think what Tim said, the beginning point is to see the people on the streets, let them see us, and which is really Signs of Humanity is really about seeing the humanity in each other. So I think that's an easy thing. As someone who's an educator or as just a human being, I think another thing that can contribute is to be a voice for those folks when I'm in a group of some of my wealthy white friends and somebody makes a comment about someone experiencing homelessness or them as a group and it's derogatory, when I can be a voice for them because they're not there to speak up for themselves or their stories, that seems like a simple thing, but I have witnessed the change it can make in my small groups. And then I've seen some of my friends who I've been in groups with for years take that on themselves and come and tell me about times they've called their friends out or they've stopped their friends from saying things and just tried to, and not from a shaming place at all, but simply to try to educate. And I think awareness and compassion go together, and that empathy goes up as when people learn things. And so it's so easy to be ignorant and to just keep on going about our lives without looking. So, it also, I as you were talking, pulled up this message. So I posted about our march that's coming up on November 20th. A student I've never met randomly messages me through Instagram and says, hello, I'm an SMU student who experienced homelessness. I actually had an article about my story on the SMU Daily. I wanted to know when the We Are All Homeless on Campus event with speakers is. If it's okay, I'd like to speak and share my story because I don't think many SMU students have experienced homelessness or really know what that means. I'd like to provide some insight and maybe inspire more support. So this came from, and it turns out it's a young Asian woman who I've not met, but I look forward to meeting, and she's going to speak at our event on the 20th. And I find that I say this a lot, but to stay open to where this project takes me, I'm constantly getting to meet amazing people and realizing that the more we simply make space for each other, it's profound at how much impact that can have. And as an educator, of course, I think this is the greatest gig on the planet. So all of you, kudos to all of you that are teaching in any form, but bringing it into the classroom. I bring my signs into the classroom and make students pick a sign and then write 2 or 3 sentences about the person they thought was holding that sign. And, you know, again, a bunch of privileged students shocked me by their level of insight. And so I think there's lots of ways to bring it into the classroom too.
On that note of classrooms and students, I think it's interesting that you began in advertising and then later on pursued an MFA. Is there any, I don't know, advice that you could give to students that might be pursuing art as a first or even second career option?
Yes, I think part of it is to, as I said earlier, some version of trust your goofy ideas and your weird instincts when they come up, because art often comes from a place of discomfort and not averting our eyes and being willing to tell the uncomfortable truths. I think that I certainly have paid attention to, beginning with grad school, watching how art in the country, that there is more and more art that seems to be focused on marginalized groups and ways of bringing conversations to us in a way that maybe they didn't happen earlier. So I would tell students to whatever the thing is that you are passionate about, dive in with both feet. Go figure out how you can use art as a tool to start those conversations or to bring awareness or to, you know, for me, the most powerful art is something that moves me some way, shape, or form. And I've been shocked in museums and galleries and on the street by stuff I didn't expect to hit me the way it did. And I think my students do this. I mean, the reason I say this is the greatest gig on the planet is every day in class, my students are shocking me by their creativity and by showing me a new way of thinking about something. So I think to boil all that down, it's really, I think, about encouragement as much as anything else. Keep those fires lit.
Thanks, Willie. So I know we're getting near the end of our time. I have 100 more questions, but I'll just ask one. I know before we went live, we talked a little bit about a future ongoing project. I don't know if you can share about that, or if there's anything you can share about the future of this project or where you want to see it go.
Yes, I've alluded to my long to-do list, which is sort of never ending. We do have a nonprofit, and for us, funds that come to us are used to raise awareness. And I know Rebecca asked me earlier about a book, which I've been working on a book for years, which is finally, I feel like I finally have the shape of what this book's going to be. It's requiring me to write a lot more than I expected, but I think that's going to be another way to get this message out to a different and new audience. We're also working on pitching this as a TV series to follow up on the documentary. We have ideas for other documentaries, one of which is the story of Eddie Dunn, which personally I think might be the most compelling documentary about homelessness that I could imagine. And besides that, I'm going to be doing an installation in Boston next week. I'm working with a group at USC in LA about possibly bringing exhibits and/or a march to their campus. I've got projects lined up throughout the spring of 2022, research, exhibits, and speaking. And for me, it's always about, I wish we had enough money to hire an executive director so I could really focus on the things I want to focus on, because I do believe there are a lot of people that want to support and help this project. And For me, it's just about having the human resources to get it all done. But yeah, lots of stuff in the works. And, you know, I know Tim and I have talked about a number of things as well. We'll see where all of it goes. But for now, I just, as soon as I have openings in my calendar, I try to fill them up with events like this or other ones. I'm looking forward, hopefully, to one day getting to do an exhibit at Wignall. So fingers crossed.
Yes, us too, for sure. Well, huge thanks to you, Willie. We appreciate your generous spirit and for sharing about your beautiful project. Reminder to attendees, please fill out the survey. And all of you, please take good care and see you next time. Thanks again, Willie.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Tim, for joining.
Yes, thanks, Tim.